Charity walked into the lodge compound, swaying her hips with confidence. Her face glowed with well-applied makeup, and her red dress clung perfectly to her curves. Heads turned as she passed, just as she expected. "Charity, you look stunning today," one of the girls, Rebecca, complimented her. "Thank you, dear," Charity said, flipping her hair dramatically. Her beauty was undeniable, but more than that, she carried herself like she owned the world. She spoke with an air of superiority, always making sure people believed she had everything: money, connections, and a rich boyfriend who adored her. But the truth was far from it. As soon as she entered her small, poorly furnished room, she locked the door and let out a deep sigh. She removed her high heels, wincing at the pain in her feet. The dress she wore wasn't hers, it belonged to her friend, Sandra. Even her perfume was borrowed. She wanted to live like the rich girls on campus, but she had nothing. The only person who truly cared for her was David. David, the mechanic. David, the boy who had nothing but gave her everything. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She straightened her posture, put on a fake smile, and opened it. David stood there, his hands slightly dirty with engine grease. His overalls had a tear on the side, but his eyes shone with love. He was holding a black nylon bag. "Hey, baby," he said with a smile. Charity forced a smile. "David, how many times have I told you not to come to my lodge in those dirty clothes?" David's smile faded slightly. "I just closed from work and came straight here. I brought you food." He extended the bag toward her, but she barely looked at it. "David, I told you I'm not hungry," she snapped. David sighed but didn't argue. "All right. I'll just leave it here in case you change your mind." As he placed the food on the table, Charity's phone rang. She picked it up quickly, her voice suddenly soft and sweet. "Hello, darling," she purred. David froze. He stared at her, his heart sinking. She never called him darling. "Yes, I can come. Yes, I'll meet you there," she continued, ignoring David completely. When she ended the call, she turned back to him, her expression irritated. "David, please, I need to go out. Can we talk later?" David swallowed hard. "Who was that?" Charity rolled her eyes. "A friend." "A friend," David repeated, his voice laced with pain. She sighed dramatically. "David, don't start. You know I have many friends. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere important to be." She grabbed her bag and rushed out, leaving David standing there, staring at the food he had brought for her. His heart ached, but he told himself it was nothing. After all, he loved Charity, and love was supposed to endure everything. The night air was cool, but Charity barely noticed. She was too busy adjusting her dress and fixing her makeup in the reflection of a car window. She had just arrived at a high-end restaurant in town, the kind she could never afford on her own. Inside, the soft glow of chandeliers bathed the room in golden light. Couples sat at candlelit tables, laughing over expensive wine and steak. The scent of rich spices and slow-cooked meat filled the air. At a corner table, Richard, a tall, fair-skinned man with a confident smirk, waved her over. She smiled and walked toward him, making sure her steps were slow and deliberate, just the way she had seen models walk on TV. "You look good," Richard said, eyeing her like she was a prize. "Thank you," Charity said, lowering herself onto the chair opposite him. Richard was a final-year student from a wealthy family. He drove a flashy car and always had money to spend. He was the kind of man Charity had always wanted, the kind who could give her the life she dreamed of. She picked up the menu, pretending to scan the options, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about David, how he had shown up at her lodge with food after a long day at work. She shook the thought away. David is just a mechanic. Richard is the kind of man I should be with. "So, tell me, Charity," Richard said, interrupting her thoughts. "Do you have a boyfriend?" She hesitated for half a second, then smiled. "Of course not." Richard grinned. "Good. I don't like competition." She laughed softly, running her fingers through her hair, and when the waiter arrived, she ordered the most expensive meal on the menu. That night, as Richard drove her back to her lodge, she stared at the sleek interior of his car, inhaling the scent of leather and expensive cologne. "This could be my life," she thought. "This is the kind of man I should be with." When they reached the lodge, Richard leaned closer. "I'll see you soon, babe," he murmured, his fingers brushing her chin. Charity smiled and nodded, stepping out of the car like a queen. But as she approached the entrance of the lodge, her heart clenched. David was sitting on a wooden bench near the gate, waiting for her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes searched hers. "Charity," he called softly. She froze for a second but quickly forced a smile. David, what are you doing here? I waited for you, he said, standing up. I wanted to make sure you got home safe. Something in his voice made her uncomfortable. She glanced back at Richard's car as it sped away, then turned back to David. I told you I was going out with friends, she said quickly. Friends? David echoed, his jaw tightening. Charity, who was that guy? She rolled her eyes. Why are you acting like my father? Richard is just a coursemate. David studied her face. Did you eat? Charity folded her arms. Of course, I ate. What kind of question is that? David looked down at the ground, nodding slowly. I left food for you in your room, he said, his voice quiet. Charity scoffed. David, I don't need your food. You need to stop acting like what? His voice was suddenly sharper than she had ever heard it. She paused. The way he was looking at her made her uneasy. David sighed heavily. Never mind, he muttered. Good night, Charity. And with that, he turned and walked away. Charity let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Why did she feel guilty? She shook the thought away and walked inside, convincing herself that she had done nothing wrong. After all, a girl like her deserved more than a mechanic, right? David sat on the edge of his small bed, staring at the ceiling. His room was barely furnished, just a mattress on the floor, a wooden table with his mechanic tools scattered over it, and a rusty ceiling fan that made a faint creaking sound. The walls were stained with oil from the days he came home too exhausted to wash his hands before touching them. A single dim bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow light over the room. It wasn't much, but it was home. But tonight, home felt empty. His heart ached as he thought about Charity, about the way she had walked past him, the way she had lied to his face without a second thought. David had never been a rich man. He had never been the kind of man to impress a girl with money, fancy restaurants, or sleek cars. But what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in love. And for Charity, he had given everything. He had taken extra jobs to pay her school fees, skipped meals so she wouldn't lack, and worked long hours under the scorching sun just to make sure she had pocket money. But none of it seemed to matter. David sighed deeply and reached under his bed, pulling out a small, tattered notebook. Inside, he had written down every expense he had covered for Charity, her tuition, her rent, even the little things like hair products and phone data. Not because he wanted to remind her, but because he had dreamed of a future where she would look back and appreciate him. But tonight, for the first time, he wondered if that future would ever come. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the exhaustion settling in his bones. Love was supposed to be a two-way street, but with Charity, it felt like he was the only one walking. David lay down, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the first time he met her, how she had smiled at him like he was the only man in the world. Back then, he had believed that smile. Now, he wasn't so sure. Would she ever love him the way he loved her? Or was he just a stepping stone on her way to something better? As sleep slowly took over, he whispered the same prayer he had been saying for months. God, please, let her love me back. David sat on the wooden bench near the entrance of Charity's lodge, his hands clasped together, waiting patiently for her. The evening air was cool, but he barely noticed. He had spent the entire day at the workshop fixing cars and saving every little naira he could. He wasn't rich, but he was determined to make sure Charity never lacked anything. Tonight, he had planned to surprise her. He had withdrawn some of his hard-earned money to buy her a new dress, one she had admired the last time they walked past a boutique together. He had imagined the excitement on her face when he handed it to her. But as he waited, his heart suddenly clenched. A sleek black car pulled up in front of the lodge. The headlights illuminated the compound, and within seconds, the door swung open. Charity stepped out. David blinked. His heart pounded. He had seen the car before. She was dressed in a stunning red gown, holding a purse that he had never seen before. Her wrist glittered with a new bracelet. She was laughing, but it wasn't with him. A tall, well-dressed man leaned out of the car, handing her something. David watched as she took it, her fingers running over the crisp naira notes. Richard, you're too much, she giggled, playfully hitting his arm. Anything for my baby, the man responded, winking. David's throat went dry. He gripped the plastic bag in his hands, the one containing the dress he had bought for her. It suddenly felt like nothing compared to the expensive things this man was giving her. As Charity turned to walk toward the lodge, she finally noticed him. Their eyes met. For a brief second, something flickered in her expression. Guilt, surprise, he wasn't sure. Charity, David called, standing up. She sighed. David, what are you doing here? I was waiting for you, he said, taking a step closer. I got something for you. She folded her arms. David, we've talked about this. You don't have to keep doing all these things for me. David frowned. Doing things for you? Charity, I love you. Everything I do is because I... David, stop. She cut him off, glancing around. Some of her lodge mates were watching, whispering. She didn't want them to see her arguing with a mechanic. David swallowed. Where are you coming from? He asked quietly. Charity rolled her eyes. Why are you interrogating me? Am I not allowed to go out? David shook his head. That's not what I mean. His voice trailed off as he looked at her, really looked at her. The expensive dress, the jewelry, the money in her hand. The truth was staring him in the face. Still, his heart refused to believe it. I don't care where you go, he said softly. I just need to know, am I the only one in your life? Charity felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to lie, but something in his eyes made it difficult. She reached for the doorknob. David, please just go home. I'm tired. He took a step forward, trying to follow her inside. Charity, wait. She turned sharply. David, I said go home. His body froze. Slowly, he stepped back. Okay, he whispered. She sighed in relief, quickly shutting the door behind her. David stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, gripping the plastic bag tightly, he turned and walked away. At home, David lay on his small mattress, staring at the ceiling. His hands rested on his chest, still holding the dress he had bought for Charity. He tried to shake off the thoughts in his head, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. She's just stressed, he told himself. She still loves me, right? But no matter how hard he tried, the image of her stepping out of that car, her laughter, her excitement played over and over in his mind. That was his first time, since falling in love with Charity, that he felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion creeping into his heart. Doubt. David woke up earlier than usual, but his body felt heavier than ever. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been a battlefield all night, memories of Charity clashing against the nagging feeling that she was slipping away from him. Yet, he refused to believe it. She's just going through something. Maybe school stress. Maybe she needs space. He sat up, rubbing his hands over his tired face. On the floor beside his mattress, the dress he had bought for her was still neatly folded inside the plastic bag. For a moment, he thought about returning it, but then, an image of Charity smiling at him flashed in his mind, the way she used to, back when she still held his hand in public, back when she called him her baby. That was before she entered university. She's still my Charity, he whispered to himself. She just needs me to be patient. With renewed determination, he stood up, dressed quickly, and headed to the workshop. At the mechanic shop, David worked tirelessly. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he tightened bolts, checked engines, and crawled under cars, but he barely noticed. He had a plan. That evening, after work, he would surprise Charity with dinner. He knew she loved chicken and chips, so he would buy her some from the fast food joint near campus. Maybe that would remind her of how much he loved her. Tonight will be different, he told himself. But deep down, something told him he was fighting a battle he had already lost. By evening, David had finished his work and quickly cleaned himself up. He counted the money in his wallet. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a decent meal. With hopeful steps, he made his way toward Charity's lodge. His heart pounded as he knocked on her door. No answer. He knocked again. Charity. Silence. Just as he was about to knock a third time, the door next to hers creaked open. It was Jane, one of her lodge mates. David, she said, crossing her arms. She's not inside. David frowned. Where is she? Jane hesitated, biting her lip. She looked as though she wanted to say something, but then she sighed. She went out. David's heart sank. With who? Jane hesitated again, then said softly, with Richard. It felt like a knife had been plunged into David's chest. He swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. Oh, okay. Thanks. Jane watched him carefully. David, are you okay? He nodded quickly. Yeah, I'm fine. But he wasn't. He turned away, gripping the food in his hand. With slow, heavy steps, he left the lodge, feeling like a fool. That night, David sat in his small one-room apartment, staring at the untouched food on his table. He had lost his appetite. Richard, he repeated the name in his head. So it was true. Charity was with another man. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw something. But all he did was sit there, gripping his knees, trying to keep himself from breaking down. He thought about all the times he had struggled to make her happy, All the sacrifices he had made just to see her smile. Was I never enough? His hands clenched into fists, but then, as the anger threatened to take over, another emotion replaced it. Love. No matter what, he still loved her. And so, even with his heart breaking into pieces, David told himself one last lie. Maybe she will come back to me. David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Charity stepping out of Richard's car, flipping her hair, and laughing like she had no worries in the world. His heart twisted painfully. She wouldn't do this to me, he told himself. Yes, she was spending time with Richard, but that didn't mean she had stopped loving him. Right, he had been there for her when no one else was. He had paid her school fees, he had given her everything. She wouldn't just throw all that away, would she? David sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed to stop thinking too much. Charity had always been his girl, and she would remain his girl. But deep down, a voice whispered, "Are you sure?" The next morning, David woke up with renewed determination. His life was changing, and he needed to tell Charity. A few days ago, he had received an offer from a well-known automobile company. It was a dream opportunity: higher pay, better working conditions, and a real chance to build a career. He had worked tirelessly for this moment, and now that it had finally come, he wanted the first person he shared it with to be Charity. She will be proud of me, he thought. With excitement bubbling in his chest, he stopped by a small restaurant on his way to her lodge and bought her favorite meal, jollof rice with grilled chicken. He even got a cold bottle of juice to go with it. Today was going to be different. When he reached her lodge, he knocked on the door, his heart pounding with anticipation. It took a while before the door opened. Charity stood there, wearing a short, tight dress. Her face was flawless, her lips painted a deep shade of red. She looked breathtaking. David smiled. "Good morning, my love." She rolled her eyes. "David, what do you want?" "I'm busy." His smile faltered. "I got you something," he said, lifting the food pack. Charity sighed. "David, I told you I don't like morning disturbances, but I have something important to tell you," he insisted. She huffed. "Fine, talk, but make it quick." David swallowed his irritation. She was in a bad mood. Maybe she was just stressed. "I got a job," he announced, his voice filled with excitement. "Not just any job, Charity, a big one. A company saw my work and hired me. The pay is great, I can finally—" "David," she interrupted, yawning. "Can this wait? I have somewhere to be." David's heart sank. "You're not happy for me." She gave a forced smile. "Of course, I am. That's great." But her tone was dismissive, like she wasn't even listening. "Where are you going?" David asked, glancing at her outfit. Charity scoffed. "Why are you suddenly monitoring me?" "I have friends, you know." David hesitated. "Is it Richard?" Her eyes flashed with irritation. "And so what if it is?" David felt a sharp sting in his chest. "Charity, why do you keep seeing him?" She crossed her arms. "Oh, please, David. Are we really doing this?" "I just want to understand," he said, his voice soft. She let out a dry laugh. "Understand what?" "That I have other people in my life, that I don't have to depend on you for everything." David frowned. "Depend on me, Charity. I've been the one taking care of you." Her expression changed slightly, but she quickly masked it. "Look, David, I don't have time for this." She reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Before he could react, she took out a few bills. "I need money for transport," she said casually. David's stomach tightened. "Charity, I'll see you later." She cut him off, tucking the money into her purse. Then, without another word, she slammed the door in his face. David stood there, gripping the food pack tightly, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. That night, he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. How had things come to this? Why couldn't Charity see how much he loved her? Why couldn't she see that he was trying? His phone buzzed. He sat up quickly, his heart leaping. Maybe it's her. He grabbed his phone and checked the screen. It was a message from Charity. His heart pounded as he opened it. "David, I need money. Urgently. Please send it now." That was all. "No, how are you? No, I love you. No, thank you for everything you do for me. Just money." David stared at the message for a long time. The air was filled with the sweet scent of roses, chocolate, and expensive perfumes. February 14th had finally arrived, and the entire campus was painted red with love. Girls walked around in glamorous dresses, clutching neatly wrapped gift boxes and money bouquets. Some flaunted their new designer shoes and handbags, while others excitedly posted pictures of their Valentine's gifts on social media. Laughter and whispers of excitement echoed throughout the lodge as the girls compared their presents. Sandra's boyfriend got her an iPhone 14 Pro Max. Can you believe it? Jessica's man took her to Dubai. Chloe got a stack of $100 bills. Ah, love is sweet. Charity sat in front of her mirror, admiring her reflection. She had made sure to look her best today. Her makeup was flawless, and her red bodycon dress hugged her curves perfectly. She had been waiting all day for her own Valentine's surprise. Richard had promised her something grand. He had hinted at a luxurious evening, perhaps a dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town, maybe even a shopping spree. She couldn't wait. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Richard. Hey babe, something came up. Won't be able to make it today. Enjoy your day. Her smile froze. She read the message again, hoping she had misunderstood. Won't be able to make it. What does he mean by that? A wave of disappointment crashed over her. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Her friends had all received expensive gifts, and she, Charity, the most beautiful girl in the lodge, was going to end up empty-handed. Impossible. Anger boiled in her veins. She picked up her phone and dialed Richard's number, but he didn't answer. She tried again. No response. The realization hit her like a slap. He had intentionally ignored her. Richard had chosen not to spend Valentine's with her. So, after everything, this is how he treats me. Her heart pounded as she threw the phone on the bed. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. She rushed to open it, her heart lifting slightly. Maybe Richard had sent a surprise delivery. Maybe he was just messing with her. But when she opened the door, her face fell. It was David, and in his hands, he held a single loaf of bread. Charity stared at him, disbelief and fury dancing in her eyes. David, what is this? She asked, her voice cold. David swallowed nervously, his heart thudding against his chest. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times, picturing her smiling, maybe even shedding happy tears. I brought this for you, he said, holding out the bread. Charity's eyes darkened. Are you joking right now? David took a deep breath. It's not just bread. Look, Charity, I know I'm not rich. I know I can't buy you fancy gifts like other guys, but I love you. I've loved you since the first day I met you. And today, I wanted to do something special, something I have never done before. He slowly got down on one knee and pulled out a small, silver ring. Charity, his voice trembled with emotion. Will you marry me? Silence. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then, a sharp, echoing slap sliced through the air. David's head snapped to the side as pain burned across his cheek. He tasted blood. Charity had slapped him. Hard. People began to gather, whispering, gasping in shock. David looked up at her, his eyes filled with hurt. Charity, you're an idiot. David, she screamed. A loaf of bread? Do you know the kind of gifts my friends got today? And you bring me bread? Are you mad? You are proposing to me with a loaf of bread. I thought you were an ordinary mechanic. I didn't know that you were also a nonentity. David's hands trembled. I just wanted. Shut up, she spat. You are embarrassing me. I deserve better than this nonsense. If you can't afford a proper gift, then why are you even here? I don't know why I even allowed you into my life for the first time. A dirty mechanic like you. A few of the lodge girls gasped at her harsh words. One of them, Emily, stepped forward. Charity, take it easy. He's just trying to. Don't tell me to take it easy. You take it. Charity snapped, her eyes blazing. She turned to David and sneered. Since you're so desperate to give someone bread, why don't you give it to her, idiot? David looked at Emily. Then, slowly, he extended the bread towards her. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting between David and Charity. Then, to everyone's shock, she took it. A murmur ran through the crowd. David turned back to Charity. His heart ached, but something inside him had finally broken. I loved you, he whispered. Charity scoffed. Go and love yourself, David. You're a joke. Poor man like you. I don't have anything to do with poor people. David nodded slowly. He turned back to Emily, took a deep breath, and kneeled. The crowd gasped. Emily, he said, his voice stronger this time. Will you marry me? There was a stunned silence. Then, Emily smiled. Yes, she whispered. David slipped the ring onto her finger, and before anyone could process what had just happened, Emily threw her arms around him. The lodge erupted. Is this a joke? Did she just accept? What's happening? This is like a Nollywood movie. Charity watched them with a dreadful look. Her head spun. This can't be happening. Then David left without saying anything. Emily stood there with the ring in her finger, rolling her eyes from this side to that side. Some people had begun to laugh at her. Just then, a sleek, black car with a giant red ribbon pulled into the compound. Charity blinked. A car? What's going on? David climbed down and stood beside the car. The murmuring grew louder. People watched in awe as David confidently stood by the car, smiling. Charity's heart pounded. Could it be? A smug smile spread across her face. She marched towards him. So this is the real surprise, she said. I knew you wouldn't let me down. David stared at her, unreadable. Charity flipped her hair. Where are the keys? I gave you the keys, David said, grinning. Charity scanned herself and laughed again. Babe, give me the keys now, Charity said. That was her first time addressing him like a babe after so many months. David didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Emily. Come and open your car, he said to Emily, and Emily's eyes widened. He didn't give her a key. Then David smiled. Open the bread, he said softly. Emily hesitated, then slowly tore the loaf apart. A pair of car keys dropped into her hands. Charity's stomach turned to ice. Her vision blurred. Wait. David took the keys from Emily's palm and held them up. This car, he said, belongs to my fiancé. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Charity staggered back. No, this isn't real. David exhaled deeply. For years, he had poured his heart, soul, and everything he had into Charity. But today, he was done. He turned to Emily, cupped her face gently, and whispered, Let's go and celebrate. As they walked away, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Charity stood alone, watching them disappear, her heart twisting painfully. She realized what she had lost. She stood frozen in the middle of the lodge compound, her mind spinning. David and Emily's laughter still echoed in the air as they drove off in the sleek, ribbon-wrapped car. Around her, the other girls buzzed with excitement, dissecting every detail of the scene that had just unfolded. But Charity barely heard them. Her chest burned with rage and disbelief. David, my David, engaged to Emily. Where did he get the money from? When did he make such money? She bit her lower lip hard, trying to push back the tears stinging her eyes. Her hands trembled as she clenched them into fists. It's fine, she told herself. It's just a stupid car. Richard will give me something better, bigger. I don't need David. She lifted her chin, masking her shame with defiance. She refused to let anyone see her break. When Richard arrives, everyone will forget about David and his nonsense, she signed. Perhaps he had been dating Emily at her back and she didn't know. With that thought, she turned sharply and walked toward her room, heels clicking against the concrete floor. As she reached the door, a voice behind her called out urgently, Charity, wait. It was Sandra, one of her closest lodge mates. She was breathless, clutching her phone tightly in her hand. Her face was a mixture of excitement and pity. You need to see this, Sandra said, thrusting her phone toward her. Charity rolled her eyes. What is it now? Sandra unlocked her screen and opened a trending social media post. It's about Richard. At the sound of his name, Charity's heart leapt. Maybe this was the grand Valentine surprise she had been waiting for. But as her eyes scanned the screen, the world around her seemed to tilt. There, on the screen, was Richard kneeling before another woman, holding out a glittering diamond ring. The caption read, She said yes. Congratulations to the newest power couple. Charity's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred as she scrolled through the pictures, image after image of Richard smiling with the woman. A familiar woman. Her blood ran cold. It was Vanessa. Charity's heart slammed against her ribs. She remembered Vanessa well, how she had once spotted her in Richard's car, the way they laughed and shared inside jokes. When she had asked Richard who Vanessa was, he had laughed it off, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She's my cousin, he had said, his voice so smooth, so convincing. A bitter laugh bubbled in Charity's throat. Cousin? This cousin was now wearing an engagement ring and posing beside the car Charity had once imagined herself owning. Her fingers shook as she exited the app and frantically dialed Richard's number. The line rang. Once. Twice. Finally, the call connected, but it wasn't Richard's voice that answered. It was hers. Hello? The woman's voice was calm but sharp. Charity's heart pounded. Put Richard on the phone, she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. A cruel laugh echoed through the speaker. Oh, sweetie, Vanessa said mockingly. Richard is busy with his fiancée. Charity's knees weakened. Fiancée? Yes, Vanessa snapped. And listen carefully, I know who you are. Stay away from my man. Whatever you do had is over. Don't you ever call this number again. Before Charity could respond, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. The world around her faded. The whispers, the laughter, everything melted into a distant hum. Her legs buckled, and she stumbled back against the wall for support. This isn't real. This can't be happening. Tears blurred her vision as the reality sank in. The man she had thrown David away for, the man she had pinned all her hopes on, had never truly been hers. He had played her, lied to her, used her, and now he belonged to someone else. A tear slipped down her cheek, and then another. Slowly and sluggishly, she walked into her room. She collapsed on her bed, her body trembling with heartbreak. She thought back to all the times David had shown up, hands covered in grease, heart full of love. All the times he had given her money when she asked, never hesitating, never questioning. She remembered his smile, the softness in his eyes whenever he looked at her. He loved me, she whispered, and she had thrown it all away. For what? For a man who had never planned a future with her. A sob escaped her throat as she curled into herself, wrapping her arms tightly around her body. Outside, the sound of distant laughter echoed through the night. Other girls were celebrating love, receiving gifts, and feeling cherished. And she had nothing. Not David, not Richard, not even her pride. As the night deepened, Charity lay in the darkness, haunted by the bitter truth. She had lost the one man who had ever truly loved her, and no amount of tears could bring him back. Lessons. The greatest mistake we make is taking pure love for granted, thinking it will always wait for us. But love, once abandoned, finds a new home, one that knows its worth. Regret is the cruelest companion. It does not arrive when we are blind, but waits until our eyes are wide open, showing us everything we lost. Hello champions, I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.